Aaron, thank you so much for coming on. Means a lot to have you here. Tell us about what you're working on. And I'm so excited about it for a variety of reasons, but primarily because, I'm from Utah, small state in, the United States. And so many people leave Utah for like a New York City or a San Francisco or because that's where the big jobs are. That's where the big things is. And I love anything that allows people to stay where they're from, close to their family, and still be as successful as they would in those other places.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Clint. First of all, thanks for bringing me on board, bringing me on the show. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the projects we're working on. And it's I have a few thoughts to answer your question because I left. Right?
Yeah.
Living
you did
in living in Australia, I was in Utah till I was 8. Came back for uni, as they say in Australia, college here, and left again. So I think there's a story to tell on both sides in terms of opportunities to do this kind of digital nomad thing, which is a recent term, but something I've been doing for quite some time, but also to provide innovation and technologies that allow people to make that choice and to stay in their communities if they so choose. I think in an increasingly interconnected world, that just brings opportunity, and it brings a certain amount of independence and freedom to live and work where you want, depending on your situation. We work, Welchman Keen does a lot of work in the developing world, and I don't love that term developing because it implies that you have to, right? It implies that there's that development means improvement, and I think we've learned that's not always the case. But in terms of still providing opportunities to people that want other things in their lives and want to grow and want to have access to other opportunities, other workforce engagements, different types of careers or educational opportunities. And with some of our projects that we're working on, we're hoping to provide that to these communities in developing countries.
And what countries specifically?
So we're a global company. I mean, we're spread all over the place. We're not a significantly large company.
Yeah.
We're large for a consulting firm, I would say. But we have offices in Singapore and Warsaw and some representation here in the U.S. and opening up in Panama soon. So that hasn't been announced yet. Don't tell anybody. Yeah. But we're working on that and hiring staff for that kind of regional representation. We've been doing a lot of work in the Pacific Islands. We have a lot of engagement with primarily Vanuatu, which is not usually on American social consciousness, but it's a country that is, I would say, northwest of Fiji, and you've heard of Fiji. You've heard of Fiji before. We've had engagements with Fiji as well, and we've had some conversations with their Ministry of Education around this kind of remote connectivity project and sustainability for remote connectivity. We've done a lot of work in Kiribati, which is another country that a lot of people haven't heard of, and Solomon Islands, and which you probably have because of Guadalcanal and that history. And now we're having these conversations in Latin America and the Caribbean. So I just came from Grenada and Barbados, and there's
you get to be in the cool places, man.
Yeah, that was the point.
Most beautiful places.
That's the idea. That's the idea, right? Is to get to these cool places, and I like to engage when I travel. I don't like. Look, I grew up in Israel for many, many years and lived in Cyprus for many years when I was young and lived in a lot of places and developed this allergy against, kind of being the tourist. And so I like to travel with a purpose, and I like to engage with governments, with communities, with businesses, and bring those people together around innovative ideas. That's what we're doing.
And because I started this conversation, be like, how cool is it that you can figure out a way, like if you want to stay and work where you live or where you grew up, how awesome is that? But the reverse of that is just as cool, if not cooler, where you can work wherever you want in the world. And that technology and that ability, like, that's a relatively new thing.
Yeah, I mean it is, and the idea of a remote first, this is not something, at least for me, that started during COVID. I mean, this was something I've been thinking about for 20 years, wanting to build a company around a remote first concept. You can't do that in every industry. You can't do if you're engaged in material production, factory work. It's just you have to have shifts. But going back historically with the Industrial Revolution, what we have now evolved out of that concept. You go to work.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who choose other careers because they don't like being in an office. And that works for some people. But it's nice to think of opportunities for those. And I think COVID and everything we went through with lockdowns gave us opportunities to try that out.
Yeah.
Some people not require, but some people really thrive in those environments. They like being social in the office space, or they like that kind of 9-to-5 structure, or they like leaving work at work. Other people have a more flexible mindset, and they like to. There are those who like to work at 2 a.m, and that works for them. That's when the creative juices get flowing. And so we've tried to create an environment at Welchman Keen where the people we hire really are the kinds of people that really thrive in that kind of virtual environment, virtual teams, and can work and find ways to be proactive and productive in those environments. And there's some people just who have a hard time with that.
Yeah.
So we try to find the ones who that works for. We also found that it builds a lot of loyalty when you have a work environment, especially internationally, in cultures like Singapore, where our headquarters is. It's very much built around a structured environment. So to offer up a remote first opportunity, especially for working mothers or others who have a lot of responsibility in the home or elsewhere, or just really like that flexibility, it's difficult to find companies that offer that, especially with return to work policies and hierarchical cultures. So we do things like working around school pickup time schedules and making sure that our meetings aren't interfering with some really important key moments in people's lives.
How is AI changing everything that you just described? Like, is it making it easier to do remote work? Is it like, and what do you think? Like, what are we going to have jobs in like 5-10 years?
It's AI is still. There's part of me that thinks, and there's some of this kind of, it's the next like crypto or blockchain or cloud or 3D printing or whatever the wave of what everyone's talking about is. What comes of that, I think you'll have the wave and then you'll have what sticks, right? AI is a game changer in a lot of ways. We'll adapt to it. People will find jobs. It's not going to take those away. It will take away some jobs. We have writers that work for us. They use AI, and it needs to be used in the right way, because if you have AI doing all your writing, it's not going to be creative or different. Then everybody is coming up with the exact same formula based on the exact same algorithms. And I think that for writers, that produces an opportunity to show that you can do something that AI can't, which is the case. And it's never, like, AI is not human, and I don't know why we keep having this God complex that makes us want to invent ourselves. But there are other exciting opportunities. I think one of the best in terms of our use case, one of the best, there's two ways we're looking at AI and how it can improve the lives of people in some of the least developed countries in the world. One of these is around AI and biometrics, and what do you do with a population that is not connected, never been connected, and you kind of want to preserve that. But they also need to be registered in some way, shape, or form for the national ID system. And so we're looking at ways to service those requirements. What do you do when someone's roughly 45 years old and they don't know what their birth date is, and they're in a culture that doesn't really engage that way, and yet they have government privileges that they're not a part of.
They don't have access to.
They don't have
currently.
access,
Yeah.
and the ability to vote, the ability to do a lot of
Yeah.
things that are their rights and privileges, and they're just not engaged.
That's a fascinating challenge, actually.
So that's one. Another one is the communications. Language is a construct, and if we have human understanding, there are a lot of things that people can do that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. There are jobs they can perform, and I think AI aided communication across international boundaries, across international. So you may have a budding engineer that just isn't great, and they're judged on their English, not on their engineering skills.
Yeah.
So with AI helping that along, they can write their emails in ways that the idea will get across. And we have engineers like that here in Utah, right?
Of course.
And maybe they need a little bit of help, but I think crossing cultural and I think AI is going to do a lot for that remote work opportunity. There's another conversation around jobs, and if we democratize the whole world, where do all the jobs go? But
usually these groundbreaking technologies, though, create more jobs than they devastate, like more jobs than they destroy, right? That's typically been the case with like kind of big industrial revolution type things. But it is scary, and who knows if that trend will continue.
Yeah, I mean, you can talk from a place of fear about the jobs we're going to lose, or you can realize that most of the jobs we had or have now are invented anyway, right? So,
exactly.
So we evolve, we adapt, jobs will be created. There's a lot of jobs around AI development that didn't exist. So we'll get there, and we'll continue to find ways to live our lives and adapt to what it is. There's a lot to be done around AI policy and regulation and things like that. And one of the things, at least from a developing country standpoint, a point that I want to get across is that it's important to ensure that their worldview, if our future is guided in some way, shape, or form by AI, that those algorithms and those parameters are representative of more than there are cultures around the world that are going to be impacted by this, and it's important to consider those cultural values in terms of how we build that in. And beyond that, I mean, it's I have a close friend that's very involved in the AI, women in AI, and she has thoughts on this. When the developers of AI are predominantly male, and will develop whether they intend to do it or not from that worldview and that mindset. So
that's an interesting challenge.
It's significant when it comes to culture. There's an organization called the International Telecommunication Union that most people don't know about, and wouldn't have a reason to. But it's the place where the world has agreed we come together and talk about standards, and they've started they've started an annual event called AI for Good. So it's intended to bring countries and companies together around this conversation, and AI is one of the new conversations that they're building this conversation around. ITU is a sister organization of the United Nations, so it's based in Geneva, but a lot of important things happen there, and there's a lot of good people that are trying to ensure that the policies are move forward in a way that benefits humanity. So if you haven't heard of ITU, suggest you look into it.
That's cool. Speaking of benefit, you're a benefit corporation, right?
Yeah, we are. B Corp. There's companies out there, and you'll see the B Corp symbol. Specifically out of Singapore, we're a Singapore B Corp, and around this idea that profit isn't the end all of doing business, and a lot of companies talk about being socially minded, but a B Corp actually enshrines that in the laws of your your
Yeah.
business entity, right? And it was a year-long process of being evaluated and audited, and you have the opportunity to talk about what you're doing, and there's a bunch of different categories in order to qualify, and we did quite well in that.
Yeah.
So
What are what's the governance structure? I'm sure people are wondering, like, because it's not a nonprofit, but it's also not like your standard corporation. And so, is it like in the documents of the company where you're like, we will do X as part of this, so you kind of like have to do it? Is that, am I understanding that right?
yeah, basically, it is a for-profit company,
Yeah.
but it's a social enterprise, and this concept has been around roughly since the early '70s around social enterprise. But B Corp and B Lab has tried to build this in so that even by going through the process, business owners can recognize what those values are, and then you build those into your structures and you build those into your articles of
Yeah.
incorporation. Really,
Yeah.
if your company grows and you sell it, those are baked in. If there's a new board, if they bring on a new CEO, you still have these governing principles around social welfare and around what you're trying to do in terms of sustainability in the environment, and all of those kinds
Yeah.
of guiding principles.
Tell me about Singapore. Why is it such an incredible place for companies and businesses? It's becoming like, like a New York or a London in terms of like its ability, like on the finance side, on business side. It's pretty incredible. Why is that?
Yeah, there's a bunch of reasons, but it was very intentional. Singapore is a phenomenal project, very much around becoming kind of this financial hub of Asia. There's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of cash flow, and a lot of that has to do with kind of China's development
Mm-hmm.
over the past 30, 40 years, where yes, you have Shanghai and you have Hong Kong, but in terms of also Southeast Asia and where people go to pull Asia together, Singapore is a very comfortable place to do that.
Yeah.
But Singapore's development, following its independence from Malaysia, has been very intentional. And there's a good reason for that in terms of their policies, the way that they work with and look, no place is perfect,
Yeah.
but they work towards, it's a very technocratic governance model, and so they work towards what works for their population and with their population. A good example is corruption. It's very, very, very rare that you will find cases of corruption in the Singapore government, because their government employees are some of the highest paid
Mm.
positions, and so you're not going to risk that
Yeah.
by by doing something untoward.
Yeah, that's an interesting solution.
So people want those government roles, and you get your best and brightest that fill those roles. We have very good relationships with the IMDA, who sponsors our memberships to various international organizations like the International Telecommunication Union or Asia Pacific Telecommunity, that are these forums around technology and digital transformation, and a lot of these other areas, international
Yeah.
technology standards. Satellite is a big one right now.
Yeah. When you go to these developing countries, how do you identify the leaders in those communities? And how do you support them? How do you build them up, give them the resources they need, but also like they're already leaders in those communities. And so we can learn from them as well, right? Like, so I just wonder, like, how do you identify leaders in those?
So I think there's a bit of paradigm shift that happens when you're doing more than just kind of coming in and touching so-called developing countries, and communities. I think those who come from a developed mindset, or very urban environments, and very kind of technologically, a lot of infrastructure, and you go to these very, very remote, very rural communities, your instinct is to see poverty, and it's just not the case.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a way of life, and the instinct then is to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking, oh, but when you experience it and you're there, again, humans are very adaptable. And when you go camping, you're in a very similar circumstance, unless you bought like everything REI has to offer to make it a comfortable thing, but you adapt, right? And I can tell you that in terms of sheer happiness, they have challenges and they have good days and they have bad days just like we are, and so there's no real association there, and you have to disconnect from that. And no kind of sociology class from college is going to teach you how to do that. That's something you have to experience for yourself. So when you engage, I mean, we have the benefit of having an MOU with the government of Vanuatu around this digital transformation project that we're rolling out, and they bring us to the communities. Dalcy is our local on the ground contact. She's the former head of the regulator. She knows these communities, but even when you go from the urban environment of Port Vila, which is the capital of Vanuatu, and you go out to the outlying islands, and there's a project we're working on in an island called Malakula, where there's just no connectivity on this island. Vanuatu has numerous islands, big and small, in the low 80s.
Yeah.
So you can imagine, and some very, very each one of them has its own little microculture. If you have the time to look up Vanuatu and things like Pentecost Island in there, bungee jumping basically with vines, like look it up. It's really cool. Or Tana Island and the cargo cult. Really interesting stuff. So it's a phenomenally diverse environment. But again, even them, when they're going from Port Vila to these remote islands, there's a difference. There's even after people from those islands who come to the urban center, their mindset changes and they adapt to that urban environment. And those are usually ones who end up in leadership positions and in government and in running businesses.
Yeah.
But they've come from all over. Right? Yeah. And the idea is, how do we build those opportunities without them having without having to pull them out of the islands and have those opportunities in the city? How do we keep them close to their families? How do we keep them or going back once they've built up the skills? If they've learned some telecommunications or some kind of engineering or other kinds of medical skill sets, how do we send them back to their communities and sustain them and give them an environment where they can continue to have a career, but be close to family?
Yeah, it seems like it's not like you're trying to change cultures, change lifestyles, change anything other than providing access to opportunities, which is a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about connecting the unconnected. A little under half the world is still unconnected. There are people who should be, honestly. Yeah. Like, we don't need to connect everyone. There's not, and there's been a lot of projects over the past 20, 30 years, and some of them have been successful, many have not. And we've launched a project called the Economic Micro Hub that is built around a multi-use facility that brings all of those use cases around connectivity, not just connecting a community and then leaving them to fend for themselves, and all of the good and bad that the internet brings. And there are a lot of organizations that focus on the digital literacy around helping child online protection, helping newly connected communities understand some of the dangers of misinformation, disinformation. Around the world, people get online and the first thing they download is Facebook, and they think that's the internet, right? So so there's pros and cons to that, honestly, with a newly connected community, and it's important that those big tech companies really come to the table in terms of taking responsibility for not only the pros but also the cons and working with this. A lot of these countries don't really get much service when things go wrong on social media. So in terms of social responsibility, those are things where companies like ours are trying to bridge that gap from both a planning and a policy standpoint to make sure people are protected from harmful content in places where they really don't have much to stand on and push back on these. We want to go beyond that. We want to look at what benefits does connectivity bring, and I think some of the real benefits can come in terms of online access to online education, having kind of a virtual office environment where they can go and connect. A couple of the big issues Vanuatu is facing that we're trying to resolve is if you want, for instance, an ID in Vanuatu, you have to go to Port Vila, and travel is expensive. And right now there's some issues with the national airline, so you've got to take a boat, and it can be overnight. Right. So you're talking about a 12-hour trip, and, from your community, it might be an 8-hour drive to a 12-hour boat ride to a 3-hour drive to go and get your ID. And the cost is high. Even you and I here in the United States would, at this point, would say, wow, that's an expensive ticket. So they save up for 6 months just for this ticket to go to the capital, so then get an ID, so that they might be able to get, a seasonal job in Australia or New Zealand or something like that. But then they're there, and they're in the big city, quote unquote, in Port Vila, and they don't really go back. They find jobs, and they build friends, and they start, getting together and drinking kava, which is a local kind of thing. And some just find a new life there, but they don't go back. And we want to make sure there are opportunities and connectivity so that opportunity exists. If they have a job that they could do remotely, or that you can build something, a way that they can do that e-government, national ID service from their island, then they don't lose those working age young adults to the other opportunities, which if they want to pursue those, great, but we want those opportunities to be local as well.
What's something you've learned in all of your experience in this that kind of shocked you, or would resonate with a group of CEOs and leaders? Like, what have you learned in doing all this? It's fascinating. You have this incredible career and this incredible position to be helping so many different people from around the world. Like, what have you learned from this?
There's been a lot of learning, and I keep learning. And you think a region. One thing you learn is there's not much difference. Yes, there are cultural differences, but we're all people. And once you start, and there are minor cultural differences that can really get you in. You can offend people really quickly if you don't know what's going on, and you say or do the right thing, or and usually you get some leeway if you're from somewhere else. But fundamentally, what I've learned is that binds us all together. And certain types of humor and certain types of jokes are universal. Everybody has families. Everybody's got family situations and significant others and partners and children, and the challenges that we face are absolutely universal across the world. Everybody understands those basic dynamics, no matter what your definition of family is or whatever it is. I think I've learned that a lot of that is cultural construct, and the fundamentals of what that is, when you get past whatever we build on top of it, and whatever we start to kind of wrap around that, whatever structure we put around that, kind of falls apart really quickly when you realize that we're all human beings. And fundamentally, the human mind is pretty much the same, no matter how much education you've had, or no matter how much work experience, or no matter where you're from. Yes, there are significant differences, but that's really surface.
Well, it's been incredible to have you on here. We end every interview at CEO.com with the same question, and that is, at CEO.com, we believe the chances one gives is just as important as the chances one takes. When you hear that, who gave you a chance to get you to where you are today?
That is a really, really interesting question. I think, and there's a whole, I'm seeing, imagining a whole lineup.
It's a hard question, huh?
A whole lineup of individuals. I think just being here and sitting at this table, I'm not that far away from my very first kind of post-college job in Salt Lake City, in the Triad Center at the time, in advertising, DSW Partners. They were bought by Euro RSCG, and it was advertising, and it was digital, and we were doing stuff for Intel. It was cool. It was great fun. I don't even remember the name of the hiring manager, but he picked someone up who and put me as account manager over a pretty significant account for working for Intel at the time.
Yeah, that's
And
incredible.
there was a lot of trust there, and I think he recognized that here was someone who maybe thought a little bit differently, and maybe that was good.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a great opportunity. It was here in Utah that happened.
Right here in
So,
Utah.
yeah.
It's incredible. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Clint.